Welcome to another episode of Naked with Dr. Money. I'm Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, aka Dr. Money. As you know, I join you every Wednesday at noon Pacific, and we have a conversation about mindset. This conversation has become so interesting and exciting. A conversation with my guest. I'll go through the usual questions. I'll ask my guest about mindset, when he first realized he had a particular mindset, if he thinks mindset is the result of his nature, how he was nurtured, or a little bit of both, how his mindset motivated him to take particular actions, and more importantly, how all of those things resulted in his manifestations. Well, my guest today is Paul Byrne. He is a colleague and friend. He's someone that I met along my journey. He interviewed me for a position and made the recommendation for the hiring of an organization that I was able to join and work with him at. Along this journey, we had a fabulous time, I think. I loved the organization. I loved the opportunity. But he stood out both from the interview process, and we really maintained our friendship, these many moons along the way. And that's a funny thing, is you never know along your journey if somebody is in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime until you walk it forward. Well, Paul Byrne is going to join us. Like I said, he's here. He's in Australia. So let me bring him into this conversation. Hey, Paul, how you doing?
Hi, Stephanie. Good to see you.
Likewise. And so officially, you're about 17 hours ahead.
Yeah, I'm in Sydney, Australia, so that's about 17
Yeah.
hours ahead. So it's Friday morning here.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'm so glad that we could have a time to jump on and talk about mindset. I think the last time I saw you was in Dubai, yes? Yes. That was the
Yes, I
last
think so.
time we saw each other. It was in Dubai, and a lot has happened since Dubai.
Everything. COVID, the whole 9 yards.
Who would have thunk it, right?
Unbelievable. We met in
Totally.
like 2000. I'm trying to think when we met. 2006, I think. Wow,
Yeah.
2024 today. My
Wow.
goodness.
My goodness, huh? You didn't know. You didn't realize I was going to be sticky in your life, huh?
That's amazing. 2006 is now. That's going to be 20 years.
I
That's
mean,
amazing.
look, I'm not counting. You can keep counting. Don't be trying to tell my age.
No, that's very good. That's actually very good for an effortless industry colleague and good friend.
Yeah, don't you think? Right? And
Mm.
every time we speak, we usually have these rich and meaningful conversations. So I'm so glad that you were willing to join me on Naked with Dr. Money. I know you were a little worried about that. You wondered if I was going to make you show up naked, huh? Tell the truth.
No, I was wondering whether you were going to turn up naked. That was my concern.
Yeah, I think it's gone both ways. But, the idea is, I'm pulling back that layer. A lot of my folks say that, they only know one side, the corporate side, the strategist, the businesswoman, whatever. But what makes me tick and how do I function behind the scenes? And so Naked is an opportunity to share what my journey is like, because I'm in another startup. And, the pains of launching, not only conceptualizing, but creating and then trying to capitalize, build out capacity, build out your key customers to gain initial market traction. All of those things are very challenging in the beginning of a startup. I liken it to a woman who has had a child before and went through the whole process, and then you've given birth, that delivery room and that pain, but then you're so blessed when you have that baby come forward, and you kind of, after a while, you're in love with the baby, you forget about the pain part. So you kind of forget about the startup process, and then you go and do it again. You're like, I must be crazy. What made me think that I wanted to take on another startup? Like, whose bright idea was this?
Well,
Whose bright
actually,
idea was this?
people that do startups are are a certain personality types. There's a lot of people that not comfortable with uncertainty. What counters uncertainty is vision. So if people have vision and foresight, then they're happy to take risks. Whereas other people's personalities who are highly reliant on certainty, they're less likely to do that. So yeah, I commend you on all the different startups you've done over the years. It's amazing watching this journey.
Well, thank you. So, what are you up to these days over there in good old Sydney?
I'm just trying to think when we last left off. So I run two companies since we last left off, and now I have my own. I now have my own business. So I ran companies that were in the real estate development and project management space. So I continued to do that. So in terms of going into my own business, it was just simply a transition out of corporate life into that, where I'm servicing probably ideally the corporate sector. I understand it. The only difference is if you're starting off a business, you either got to use it with either the contacts you have, and then you launch into that type of business, or you have to have some sort of marketing strategy on how you're going to penetrate the market and what sectors and what geographies. That's important. So I took the easy road and ran with what I knew, which was different real estate types. So I went more upstream rather than downstream. When I say downstream is more implementation, construction, things like that, whereas upstream is more initiating deals, advisory, development, things like that. So I decided to go into sort of advisory and project management, whereby I advise on putting all the deals together, and if they go over the line, then I'll oversee the implementation of them from project management through, let's call it pre-award. Pre-awards everything from pre-commitment, funding, design, authority approvals, what else? Tender, and then once it gets to construction, then you've got 2 or 3 years of construction. So that's what I'm doing these days, and I'm based in Sydney, and then I'm doing that in different states in Australia, mainly in Sydney. But you'll find north of Sydney, there's a state called Queensland, where there's the Sunshine Coast, so it's a bit like Florida. So it's a high growth area. So that's where there's a lot of property development, real estate development.
Yes, I've been hearing.
So that's where I go to Brisbane quite a lot. Brisbane and Gold Coast quite a lot, because that's where a lot of the expansion is. Whereas I found with COVID, there was a lot of change during COVID. People living in the bigger cities, Sydney has a population of like 5.5 million. Melbourne has the same, about 5.5 million. They're bigger cities. People moved out of those cities and they moved north. So it's the opposite to the US. So if you go north, you go towards the heat, which is the equator. Whereas if you go south, it's cold. Whereas in the US, it's the opposite. You go south, it's warmer.
Yes.
So everything's the opposite here in Australia. So Queensland's where all the growth is, basically. So I transitioned into a business that I knew. I didn't start with something new, mainly because I had 30 years plus experience in one field, and it was just made sense to transition into something new. The only thing perhaps I could have done differently was maybe got into the technology side of property. Maybe I could have done that, but it's not too late to do that. But all I'm doing now is just the conventional real estate development with advisory and project management of different projects. That's what I'm doing.
Excellent. Well, that's a perfect segue into my $1 million questions, which are about mindset. So, first question is, when did you first realize that you had a particular mindset? And part B of that question is, do you believe your mindset is the result of how you were nurtured, your particular nature, or a little bit of both?
Okay. Maybe I'll start with B. I grew up with a family that whereby we were fortunate to have a good education. We had a good family upbringing. So you had the flexibility to sort of do whatever you wanted to do. So there was support on that aspect, but there wasn't the pressing need to succeed because it came from a background that was reasonably fortunate. So basically, it was transitioning off sort of level 1 to level 2, if you like. So in terms of nurturing and mentoring, it was more support. It wasn't mentoring, and it wasn't mentoring in that regard with regards to my parents. But in terms of the business, when I realized I had a mindset, I discovered that I had a certain vision. In other words, I was able to envisage the future with some sort of realism. And that's when I realized in business, you need to have vision, and then you need to have some sort of strategy around how you achieve that vision, and then foresight. So two things that are important in terms of mindset are you need some sort of vision on where you're going. It doesn't need to be precise, but it needs to be broadly, here's where I'd like to go, and things like that. So number one, if you don't have vision, you're living life at sort of quarters or 6 monthly or yearly. Whereas you've got vision, you can see things like 5 years ahead, and that's a big advantage. You can see things 5 years ahead. So that's what I found myself doing. I started out, I did engineering at university. Then I started on projects as a site engineer. So I started out in construction as a site engineer. Then from site engineer, project manager, and that sort of route. And then I went into design and construction, and then I went into development. So I found that I had the mindset to move upstream where it was more lucrative. So in other words, I started out in construction as a site engineer, and you're effectively downstream. You were the last person in the line because everyone else had put the deal together upstream, and it had all gone through the design stage, so it had all been fairly well defined. And then when it got to construction's hands, then it was basically just implementation. So I thought, well, this is more lucrative to be further upstream, not downstream here. So that was a mindset where I thought to myself, well, I need to get out of construction and move higher upstream to where the value creation was. So that was a conscious mindset.
And so that sounds like you were motivated by two things. One, the reality of what you noticed in the business, and also your ability to capitalize on your vision. So you really said, okay, I have these opportunities. I want to create some additional, movement in terms of where I end up along this trajectory.
But I think, yes, but I think you need to start somewhere, and starting somewhere is graduating from university and then starting work. And then when you've started work, then when you realize, wow, I'm a long way downstream. Where's the lucrative side of this business? And the lucrative side is where it's less defined and where it's more fluid and where it's more value creative, and that's higher upstream, and that's in the development space, not in the construction space, because you're working for predefined margins in the construction space.
Yes.
Same with the consulting space. You're working to predefined margins. So in the consulting space of design consultants and things like that, architects, engineers, they're all working to sort of design fees, which are preset. Whereas when you're further upstream in development, you're assembling the puzzle. So you've got control over the costs, you've got control over the value creation, the revenue creation side. That's where I realized, I got an insight into that as I moved further upstream. And the more I moved upstream, the more my mindset was, well, okay, this is where I need to be. And my foresight was the one that capitalized on opportunities as they came along, or I created the opportunities. So I started out in construction and thought, well, I need to be higher upstream. So I got into design and construction, which was project management of design and construction. So I got to see two sides of the fence. And because we were working for developers, I got to see what they were doing. And that's when I realized, okay, I need to be closer to there. You can't make these changes instantly, but you need to move your ship in that direction. Uh, and it's vision, it's mindset, it's foresight. That combination together will get you to where you need to go. But if you can't foresee it in the first place, then you can't create a vision for yourself. So that's another problem. If you don't have any foresight and you're too used to following orders, um, then you'll limit yourself quite a lot. So mindset is a big thing, to open up your thinking. Open up your thinking so if you're not naturally born with vision, uh, and not that I do think people are, but they have the personality to be open about vision. They're the ones that seem to come up with visions, whereas people that are intense, closed-minded, they're not visionaries. They're just not. Because they won't see what they should see. Everything will pass them by because they're too preoccupied with being intense, being too micro about everything. You've got to be loose and light to some degree while you try and keep your job.
Coachable.
What?
And
Coachable.
coachable, because oftentimes, again, those minds that are so closed are not coachable. They're not open. They're so holding tight to what it is they think they know, that they don't allow the possibility that there's a bunch that you don't know. I absolutely use the opposite philosophy. The more I know, the more I recognize what I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So I'm always hungering with my curiosity for more. You're making a joke about my books before we went live, and I said, yeah, and I don't think that there's ever too many, right? Because I have a thirst, a curiosity that I need to continue to feed. But my books are relevant to the areas of my expertise, right? So my books are not just random books. They very much support the particular sectors that I've occupied and that I've developed my expertise within. And you don't develop your expertise every place at one time. You develop your expertise at a focus and time at that time. So when I was in advertising, I was in advertising. I ate it, slept it, drank it. When I left advertising and moved into real estate development, I wasn't with one foot in advertising and one foot, I was only in development. I started all over, using the example of getting your first 10,000 hours, right? To become an expert. So I was all in to understanding all of the parts of the particular business and then where it was I wanted to add significant value. And it was in response to the vision that I believe that I have, that I've seen over and over again that I do have. So definitely, about building on that mindset and being motivated to do the things that allow you to bring it forward.
If people naturally don't have mindset, sports stars do. They probably get it from an early age because they find that they're successful athletes, in their junior high school years and things like that. So they've got a discipline whereby a mindset it's part of their business to succeed. Whereas if you're not an athlete, then you'll need that mindset and that vision to either need to get it coached to you to make you more aware of it, or you need to read it in books. So you'll either have to read it from mindset books or success books. A lot of the success topic type books are very good to open up people's mindset that are not naturally open to that. So if people are not coachable, then they need to be readable. If they're not coachable or they're not prepared to read, then they're screwed. They're not going to go far.
Absolutely. Or, but also the thing is we were having a conversation. I was speaking to a gentleman earlier today about filmmakers, and he was discussing putting together a fund. And I was telling him that, my doctoral dissertation was venture capital for independent filmmakers. And so he's like, oh, tell me more. And I said, well, basically I identified some ways to finance film related projects for filmmakers that would allow them to have more equity in their projects. And I said, and initially folks thought in the business that my solutions would be the same solutions that they've previously used. But when I presented some information where I trained a group of filmmakers, they were stunned because they had never heard, you know, the theories and the approach that I had provided in terms of how they could finance, you know, their businesses as well as retain a greater ownership in their intellectual property. And I said, and that's the problem, is you have people that talk to the same people that know the same things, and they don't realize that you're kind of just running. what if what if what if there's something else outside of, you know, what you guys have in your little huddle that could help you, right? If you're not willing to step out and talk to some other people, then unfortunately you find yourself just in your little huddle doing the same things over and over again and wondering why you can't produce a different outcome. I think they call that insanity.
Yeah, I think that's called everyone's drinking the same Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful of that. You've got to be careful of that. I remember I've been to a few, what is it called? TEC, Tech, the Executive Connection, or something like that. Is that what it's called? Tech, TEC?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay, there's an interesting, I've been to a few of those where I've had to present to a range of CEOs and about my business. And you get interesting aspects from different CEOs from different industries and how they can see things. That's a good example of not drinking the same Kool-Aid. In other words, letting some light shine in on what you're doing and looking at it from a different angle. If you're not open to that, then you won't see opportunity. You just won't. Most of the people that have discovered high margin areas are something that's unconventional, that hasn't been tested before. Because if you're in a business that's an established industry, then you're all working towards similar margins. Like, I mean, it's a well trodden course. But if you want to move to something different, or make it easier or faster to make money, then you can't be looking at it the same way, because what you're doing is basically, it's a well-trodden path and it's all predictable. You're just doing the same stuff. The only thing you would have to do differently is you'd have to approach it differently, or you'd have to change scale. You'd have to move away from physical scale, because physical scale has limitations. Whereas, you know, I've heard a few real estate developers say if they had the time again, they would have gone into the technology business, not the real estate business. I thought that was interesting.
I
And
think that's interesting.
These were billionaire property developers that said if they had their time again, they would have gone into technology, not real estate, because they said the real estate took too long to produce. By the time you acquired the land, you planned what to do with it, you did a business case, you arranged the funding, you planned the project, you designed it, you got authority approvals, you built it, and you either retained it or you sold it, or you sold part of it. That process is like 3 years. Whereas when you look at some of the technology businesses, like I'm a fan of technology, but I'm not in it. But you know, I'm familiar enough to know that if you can create technology that can help lots of different people and doesn't have geographical boundaries, then that's a winner. That's a winner.
Oh, so I just had someone do that. I presented part of the technology that's part of my operational model, and there's some excitement. They're wanting to have me submit for up to a $2 million grant just to develop it because of its scalability and its perceived value in the marketplace. So I guess I'm lucky to be a little bit of both, to be both a real estate developer with a bit of a techie bit. The
Well,
technological build, that's always been my secret weapon, you know, being Gen X, right? I started off in high school. I was in building computers at UC Berkeley over summer school just for fun. but decided that I didn't want to just be a technologist, that I felt that I could use my technologically uh, abled mind in execution of my business ideals, because I knew very clearly that I wanted to be a successful entrepreneur, and I knew I wanted to be an international entrepreneur. So I think I've hit the sweet spot with this new startup where I have a little bit of both. So I'm getting an opportunity to play to all of my strengths in ways that I'm really excited about. And so it definitely is a journey that's filled with, where I say, I'm blessed every day to get up and continue to put a foot forward in these efforts. And, soon enough, I told someone, I said, well, you remember when Jeff Bezos got started and all the pundits were talking crap about him? Oh, he's taking so long. Who wants to put a bookstore online? And da 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 da. I said, then I watched Amazon take off. And then I watched, being in the investor rooms where every VC started asking any business, oh, well, how do you plan to defend against Amazon? And I said, well, I figured out that answer too. I don't have to defend against Amazon. I figured out how I can partner with Amazon in part of the execution of our business model. So check that box as well. So, we don't have to beat them. We can join them, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but
Actually,
again, looking at things differently.
Amazon's a good example, because he started out life with one business, but it was his entrepreneurial ability that took Amazon to where it is today. Wasn't if he was limited as an entrepreneur, he'd still have a book website. That's it, right? But what you
Right?
look at now it's a juggernaut globally. That's someone
Exactly.
that's someone who's an entrepreneur, and someone who has vision. In other
Yes.
words, he's moved into different markets, he's moved into different geographies, he's gone scale, 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 and he's hired the best people. He's hired the best people.
Yes.
Uh,
Talent is important.
a lot of people make the mistake of trying to save on expensive executives and things like that. They're all the ingredients or the glue that gets you to where you need to go. So that's important. So that's interesting. So if Jeff Bezos if he didn't have vision or was not an entrepreneur, then he'd still have one business, which is an online bookstore. But
Absolutely.
now it's huge. Whereas if you look at Microsoft, for example, Microsoft started out in software and still in software. There's just a bit more of it. There's MS Office. What else is there? MS Word, PowerPoint, something else, some
Yeah,
database thing.
but he played a game of dominance, of being the dominant player in the PC, so the world, but you know, whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, or whether it's able to be disrupted. I'm seeing Google make some interesting inroads with their Google suite of softwares, and I'm definitely seeing a lot more adoption with younger entrepreneurs. Not everybody is necessarily invested in Microsoft. I know that, and I don't want to get on a rant about Microsoft, but anyway, I have my own opinions about it, as well as its adoption. But more importantly, the people who attempt to utilize the software, the actual ability of mastery and usability is still very low in all of these years, which kind of speaks to me to a bit of a fail. But that's
So
another topic for another day.
so back to the vision and strategy side of things. I think people need to have a vision. So it's either 1 year ahead or 3 years ahead or 5 or 10. One of those. Then they need to embody foresight. So if they don't have it, they need to start to develop it. In other words, cognizant awareness of what you're doing and where you're going and what's opportunity. So that's an awareness thing. So if they don't have it naturally, then they need to embody it deliberately. So they need to be conscious to infuse it. So if they don't have it naturally, if they don't have foresight naturally, then they need to acquire it via just basically repetitive awareness. So I think number one, they should be reading books about success. How do I be successful? How does that relate to vision? I need a foresight to get me to where I need to go. So that's continual to get opportunities to nibble away at how I can add to my vision. And then basically, it doesn't matter what business you're in these days, because a lot of the traditional industries are going. Like, I mean, we last time we caught up was in Dubai, but there's an example of all the Gulf states are now all scrambling to reinvent themselves, because basically oil will be finished in some decades ahead. All the fossil fuels, they'll be all gone. It won't happen overnight, but that's the direction it's going. So that's the reason Saudi Arabia is taking a big initiative to counter that, so they don't end up with a hard landing. It's interesting that if there hadn't been Tesla, there wouldn't have been the push towards electric vehicles in the US. There just wouldn't have been. It's a bit like, another comparative example I could give you is US car manufacturers were always lobbying Congress not to have to put airbags in vehicles because it was an expensive addition. But then when Volvo started doing airbags in their vehicles in the 1970s, Volvo started putting airbags in vehicles. So Volvo was sold as the family safe vehicle in the 1970s. So when US manufacturers realized that it had effect on sales, they all started putting airbags in their cars, in their motor vehicles. The cost thing went out the window because it became a sales thing. So basically, I think the skills you need these days is vision, foresight. You need a mindset to get you where you need to go, and that mindset needs to have a certain amount of discipline.
Discipline, which is very important. I was reading an article a few days ago about, these Gen X and Gen Zs, that because so many things have just been given to them, handed to them, that they don't understand how to build and how to create. So they're kind of sitting on the sofa with a mobile device in their hand and expecting for whatever they want to just magically show up.
I went to a family Christmas function, and some of the my brother's children were there, and I realized that they don't know what a floppy disk is. They don't know what a floppy disk is. They've never heard of it. They know what a USB is, but they know what a floppy disk is.
Right.
So it's funny. So basically, the tools you need in a changing world going forward, I think number one, you need to have a more global mindset. More global mindset. You need to have vision, foresight. You need a mentor that can help you get to where you need to go. But choosing the right mentor is really important. And then post Second World War, people used to get married to one industry. Now it's basically business is more transferable. So you'll find that I never thought that IT would be as dominant as it was. Because if you look way back, if I look at the time when I graduated from university, IT used to be a sub-department of finance. And the reason it was is because you needed more computerization to do payroll and stuff like this, right? So it used to be a sub-function of finance. And then when it got bigger and broader, then they put it under human resources, which was even dumber. And then eventually, I think it was like 2000 that CEOs started to take note that this IT thing can give me leverage in my business. It's not just a support function. It's a difference. Um, Jack Welch, it was as late as 2000 that he started driving his company more in an IT direction for cost efficiencies, for leveraging, for scale. But he resisted it all during the second half of the 90s. So from 95 to 2000, he resisted investing the money in it. And then he went nuts in like 2000 and invested a whole lot of money in GE in technology related stuff. And that set them on a new course. But if you've got an old dog that's slow for new tricks, then that can be a problem. So a modern company CEO needs to recognize that technology is your friend in terms of scalability and reaching the market. So the other thing that's changed drastically over the years was marketing. That's enormously complex now, marketing. Whereas previously, marketing was, in the old days, marketing was, it was messaging through media. So you'd have television, you'd have newspapers and magazine, and you have radio. That was it. That's all you had for marketing. And that was all your channels for marketing. Now, marketing's as complex as IT, and it can make a huge difference on the way you do it. Marketing and comms are really important. And they're two, let's say, support functions that decades ago were really insignificant. Like IT was a support function. Marketing was a support function. Marketing now is basically the forefront of your business, and you back up your marketing with your product. So now it's standard to have a product and a service. Your point of difference is how you utilize technology and how you utilize marketing. That's your differentiators these days.
I think it's all of the functional domains. And I think that that's why it's so important that when you're putting together an organization, you want to have a well developed team with experience across the various domains that you must put in place in the organization. I know with every business that I've created, I've always felt that the technology was important because it contributed to the ability to quantify certain information that I was interested in capturing and quantifying. But anyway, I must admit, we have run out of time. Our conversation has been great and rich. I think people will take away the importance of, mindset and how that allows you to move along, your personal life as well as your professional life and to remain motivated, find ways to motivate yourself along that journey. And more importantly, to be able to see a realization of your particular desired outcomes, right? How do you produce manifestations along that process? Any last thoughts before we conclude our conversation today?
Leaders in businesses these days need to be far more wide thinking other than just operational matters, because the market moves so differently now. It's moving so much faster with technology that basically you can lose your market share in 3 years. So those two things, IT and marketing, technology and marketing, is huge difference these days. Also, too, I'd be careful about industries that require a lot of physical investment. I can't see people building an oil refinery tomorrow. The only thing in property development I would do these days is residential. Because there's a need for it. All the other stuff, you don't know how market demand will change all that, offers, things like that. So you just got to be careful how the market change going forward has changed. From every decade there was change, then now every 5 years there's change. Now it's down to every 3 years there's change. So now you need a business plan that basically you need to be looking a year ahead and roll over a year ahead. So if you're not doing that as a mindset, you're out of business before you even know it.
Boy, have we seen plenty of dinosaurs that we thought were going to be forever come and go, right?
Yeah, I'm shocked at some of the big players that have left the industry, and it's because they didn't keep touch with change.
Exactly. I keep saying to folks, what got you here will not get you there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're right. They've got to be coachable.
Yeah.
That's a key term. I haven't heard that word before. Coachable.
Yeah. 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 It is so important. It is so important. And, and sometimes, like they say, you can't see the forest for the trees. And so if you're not willing to hear from somebody else is saying, wait a second, you don't know what you don't know in terms of your blind spots. There's blind spots that you have, and there's blind spots that you don't know that you have. Somebody else can see those. You can't see them. So if you're not willing to receive feedback, a couple of, on the capital journey, I pitched to some folks who had basically written me a new one. And, a couple of people were like, well, dang, how did you feel about that? I'm like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that they were honest enough to share their perspective. And I picked from, their comments, things that I could use, and I threw the rest away. But I heard it all. And then I sorted it, recognizing what they are able to bring. Because again, if you listen to everybody has a different opinion. So you also have to qualify the sources, but it doesn't mean that you're not willing to hear feedback. That's the biggest, mistake that a lot of times people make, is they think they know it themselves and they're going to go it alone, and that they can get to where they want to be. You touched on mentorship, which again, I think I'll have to have a part 2 with you where we talk about some of those other things. But again, it all begins with mindset. And I want to thank you, Paul, for joining me today, all the way from Sydney, Australia. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think we need to do some of we used to do our regular little check-ins. So I think we need to add up a little bit more frequency to those check-ins so that we can stay on top of what one another is up to.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good.
All right. Well, take care and have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Steph.
All right. Bye. So again, everyone, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Naked with Dr. Money. If it's Wednesday and it's noon Pacific, guess what? It's Naked with Dr. Money. And I hope you'll join me for another conversation with another guest where we talk about mindset, motivations, and manifestations. Until then, be well, and I'll see you next week.